Good evening, I'm Shelby Disney, and it's an honor to welcome our guest to the McConnell Center tonight, Mr. Francisco Gonzales. Mr. Gonzales is the founder and CEO of Fearless Journeys, and he's made a notable impact in the entrepreneurial world, creating a community dedicated to fostering innovative mindsets. He has further extended his influence through his Agents of Innovation podcast, offering insights from a broad spectrum of entrepreneurs and leaders. Beyond his entrepreneurial endeavors, Mr. Gonzales is the author of The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. 100 Agents of Innovation share their fearless journeys in today's economy, which encapsulates the essence of resilience and determination. His roles as an educator, author, and global traveler enrich his contributions with diverse perspectives and a commitment to education and nonprofit efforts. Today, Mr. Gonzales will share his knowledge with us. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Francisco Gonzales to the McConnell Center.
Well, thanks so much for having me here. Really a pleasure to be in Louisville. Hi, so Louisville? Louisville? All right. And but I've known Dr. Greg. I was telling him today, I go, gosh, I think I've known you almost 20 years. I don't know who that makes old, me, him, both of us. But I first got to know him when I was starting my role at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, where he once worked, but he wasn't working there then. He was here. And one of my colleagues had been really influenced by Dr. Greg, I think when he was at ISI. I don't remember when you and Chad met, but anyway, and he actually would bring students there, and from time to time, and we were even just referencing a book that came up in conversation today by a notable professor that he had interfaced with McConnell scholars, and that was the late now George Carey, a great book called Freedom and Virtue that he had put together for ISI, former professor at Georgetown. So anyway, but so really grateful that Dr. Greg has invited me, even though I really took a step out of my previous role in life, which was working for several of these public policy think tanks, one might say in the conservative movement, doing fundraising in that space, to really, 3 years ago, leaving my role at National Review Institute to go venture out on my own and start my own company, Fearless Journeys, as you referenced. And just last year, I published this book, The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste, which I'm going to give you an overview because, as Shelby mentioned, I have this podcast called Agents of Innovation. Now, I started this podcast 9 years ago now, which is crazy. I started it because I was interfacing with a lot of entrepreneurial people, a lot of people who were business owners, and also with a lot of musicians, a lot of independent musicians, because I was on the board of a charity music festival that took place in Florida every year. It still does. I was on that board for 6 years. So I'd meet all these amazing independent musicians, and I started seeing them as entrepreneurs too, because literally they're out there selling themselves, marketing themselves, putting their talent and skills into their profession and work. And so one day I was having I would walk away from so many great meetings with so many people. Maybe they were donors to the organizations I work for. Maybe they were people I thought could be donors. Maybe they were just people I'd met at different conferences. And I'd walk away, I'd learn, if you're trying to do your best work in the field of fundraising, which can also be interpreted in some ways as sales, you really want to get to know your customer very well. One way to get to know your customer is to listen a lot and learn about their stories, learn about what moves them, what they're passionate about. And I would just hear all these great stories. And one of the things that struck me is I would meet a lot of these entrepreneurial people at their point of success, right? Probably one of the reasons that they came across my radar was they were successful at something. They had a successful company or what have you. But what I really found fascinating was when you dial back their stories and you start learning about their life experience, their failures, their challenges, maybe things that are challenging them right now. Some of the other things outside of their work or anything related to what I was there to talk to them about that they were passionate about. Maybe it was another nonprofit that they were charitable givers to, and you would hear them go into why they were interested in that charity, right? And I started thinking to myself, man, I wish I would leave a lot of these meetings and I would literally say to myself, I wish more people could hear that person's story. Especially as I was out there working for an organization like a public policy think tank, a free market think tank, that was trying to persuade people on why the principles of economic freedom were important. And I thought, these people are living the principles of economic freedom. Their stories should be heard. Well, one day I was driving around South Florida after having a great dinner with somebody the night before. Chapter 1, I think, is where I put this story in there. And I thought to myself, man, I wish more people could hear that guy's story. I think they would really be moved by it. And as I was having that thought, I was turning on a podcast. This was in late 2014. And a little idea came to my head, and I thought, wow, maybe I could have a podcast. How do you do that, And called a friend up, and he gave me some tips, and 4 or 5 months later, I finally started the podcast. And so I really started interviewing a lot of people I was already interacting with and knowing. And then as the course of the episodes come out and things like that, people start introducing me to more people, and it just seems like I just keep meeting so many great people. So what I did with the book a few years ago, I thought, hey, I'm getting close to 100 episodes. I think I'm at 138 now. But I said, I'm gonna do like 1 or 2 episodes a month. And I was literally, again, just doing this as a side project, more as a passion to introduce. I like to share my experiences with people. I like to connect people with others, hopefully to inspire other people that, hey, listen to this person's story, you might get inspired by something. And so I thought doing the podcast was a great medium to do that. I started realizing after doing a number of episodes, this was also helping my personal brand. It wasn't really something I sought out to do, but people would see me. Maybe I'd be in Dallas meeting with a donor when I was with National Review Institute, and they would literally bring up, oh, I listened to that episode, you had that guy on, blah, 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 right? And I was like, you listen to my podcast? So I thought that was kind of interesting, but I thought this is great. But it started becoming a little bit of my personal brand as well. So anyway, as I started getting to this point where I thought about, by the way, when you sit down with 10, 20, 30, 60, 80 entrepreneurs and you have one-on-one conversations for an hour, hour and a half, I would say to myself, I think I even said this on the podcast a number of times, if no one else is listening to my podcast except me, it doesn't really matter. This is a hell of an educational opportunity. I get a one-on-one with all these people and I get to learn. And when you keep having these conversations, every time you have a new conversation, it inspires you just a little bit more to take the leap yourself and do something entrepreneurial. So I think that's kind of what happened with me a little bit. And when the pandemic happened and our job, I still had my job. It was a great job, good organization I was working for. But we were now on pause. We weren't traveling. As somebody said, I'm a global traveler, right? I travel for work. I like to travel for fun. I like to see a lot of places around the world or around the country. And I thought, now I'm paused, and I had some time on my hands to think about what to do next, and that's what led me to starting Fearless Journeys and kind of evolving the podcast into a community to really inspire other people to maybe take the leap and go on their own entrepreneurial journey. So the idea of the company being called Fearless Journeys, it was really referring to the entrepreneurial journey. It could be the career journey, it could be the life journey, however you want to interpret that, but the word fearless is there because I started realizing a lot of people have an idea to do something, but they never act on it. Maybe they don't have the time to act on it, maybe they don't have the capital, the money to act on it, but a lot of times it's more that they have the fear or they have anxiety. They don't know how, they don't know how to take the first steps. So what I wanted to do with Fearless Journeys is encourage, embolden, inspire people to take that journey. And I say this frequently a lot. When you take a journey, no one should take a journey alone. And so that's why I created a community, because you're gonna have people around you. Half the people that have been on my podcast are now featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community. So actually when I started Fearless Journeys, the first 2 years, we would have an online live session, almost like a group coaching session, directly with that innovator. Now I've actually moved it up to once a week because we have so many. I have over 50 featured innovators. And we also do a book club. So every 2 months we read a new book. I saw The Alchemist on Dr. Greg's desk, and I said, that's the first book we used in the Fearless Journeys community. One of my previous podcast guests had actually introduced me to that book several years before I took the leap, but I've read it now several times, and I thought this book is like emblematic of what Fearless Journeys is. It's going on a journey because it's not about the destination, it's about the process. It's about what you discover along the way. I also like that the person takes a physical journey in The Alchemist, but they're taking really a journey to learn about themselves and what they're really what they're going to discover about themselves and their passions along the way. I think the author refers to it as their treasure. So that's really where that came about. And in the book club, at the end of every book that we do every 2 months, we bring on either the author of the book. Sometimes I'm lucky to have the author, and if I'm not, we get another featured innovator who is a fan of the book to guide us in a live online discussion. So, did this just turn off? Let's see here. But anyway, so what I want to start off with, though, is the question that's going to be on the first slide here, and that is the American dream still possible in today's economy? And I know there's a lot of anxieties and things about this question, but I wanted to just quickly, maybe a few hands or anybody that wants to jump in here. What does the American dream mean to you?
I guess I have a more traditional sense of the term because both of my parents are immigrants, and they came kind of from very poor backgrounds in the Soviet Union. So for me, like my parents are kind of like the American dream, just because of being able to build a community, and also build a lifestyle for yourself to make sure that your kids are provided for and that everyone's happy and healthy is the American dream itself. And so they've been a big motivator for me seeing that. But then sometimes I wonder, I'm is it possible what they achieve for people to still be achieving that today?
Yeah, great.
So I guess that's kind of my question in regards to that.
Great. Well, I think that the immigrant story, that's the traditional American dream. That's how this whole country started. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on what the American dream might mean to you? All right.
Yeah, I'm similar to Dylan, my dad is an immigrant. So hearing how he grew up and where he came from and where he is now, that's just kind of my version of the American dream, because I just have seen how far he's come.
Who is this, your dad?
My dad, yeah.
Yeah, great. Anyone else?
I was just going to say, just do what you love, do what you're passionate about, what you want to see change in the world without barriers, like governmental or economic barriers.
Great. All right, one more. Anybody else? All right, but that's great. Obviously, you have the immigrant story. You have maybe from one spot, maybe up the ladder, but living a life you want to live. You reiterated that here as well with doing what you're passionate about, doing what maybe your vocation, what your calling might be. And also I like how you said doing it without barriers, in a sense. And so, when it comes to the American dream, let me see if we, how do I click this? Am I clicking over here? Sorry. This is why you test things before. No, you know how to use it. I just don't. But anyway,
There we go.
which one am I clicking? That one. All right. So yeah. So when it comes to this, one of the things that I think there's a lot of anxieties right now, because when it comes to the American dream, I'm also, my dad is from Cuba as well, so I relate there to that story. I actually just got to go to Cuba for the first time last month. My dad and my grandparents never went back during their life. My dad still hasn't gone back, but I think hopefully he will soon. But being they came here and they had to work their way back, and all the sacrifices and all the hard work, but they also had the ability to do it. They had that life of upward mobility. And I still think that's very possible, although in recent years, there's been a lot of anxiety about this in the economy. There have been jobs that maybe have gone overseas. Maybe technology has disrupted the economy in many ways. You've gone from manufacturing to maybe automated things as well, right? Factories have closed, especially, in this part of the country, right, in the Midwest and everything, and in the South. And so a lot of people don't maybe see a lot of the opportunities. Also, we've had rapid change in the economy, mostly due to technology. One of the most probably the most rapid change in history. And so people maybe were going to college for something, and then the thing that they went to college for, just within a few years, those jobs may not exist anymore, or not in the format that they truly thought they would be doing a career in. Now people used to, not too long ago, be with the same company for 30, 40, 50 years, their entire career. Now people aren't even with the same careers. They move careers, not just companies. So there's a lot of anxiety. And then of course we had, 2020 happened. I don't even like to say the word, but that shut down the economy, right? That had an impact of stopping a lot of the supply chain. Then we just went through a period of inflation. Hopefully it's leveling out now. And there's just and then of course we're dealing with, when I mentioned technology, now we're moving towards the great anxiety of the future, AI, right? And what that's going to do and all these sorts of things. So a lot of anxieties. But one of the things I see with all these anxieties, and especially the anxieties that exist among young people who aren't really quite sure, you also, the other thing, right, I didn't even mention, a lot of times people think about the American dream and they think about the dream of home ownership, right? Having a home that you own, raising your family in it. And now a lot of people are finding it in this day and age that housing costs are out of control. And they're actually substantially higher compared to your incomes compared to what it used to be. So it's actually harder for people to own a home, and the housing affordability has been an issue as well. So there's all these kind of anxieties out there. But one of the things I came to the conclusion of, and maybe you'll share it, maybe you share it already, maybe I can persuade you of it, but I really believe that even though all of the challenges that exist in the American dream, and by the way, I think another challenge, and one that I've worked hard for many years is also the challenge of government intervention, government regulation, government, taxes, whatever it is, regulations and entrepreneurs, right? These are a lot of obstacles as well. But no matter how authoritarian maybe the government gets, no matter how desperate the economic situation is, one thing I've learned from interviewing all these entrepreneurs is for somebody who really truly has an entrepreneurial mindset, these things, they matter in the sense that they're things you have to deal with, but the entrepreneur thinks differently and they're always going to find a way to succeed no matter what. That's really the conclusion I've come to. And so what I did is a lot of people ask me, what are some of the common characteristics of the entrepreneurs you encounter? And so what I did is in the introduction to this book, and I'm going to go through that, is outline 10 of the common characteristics of the entrepreneur. Now I'm going to pause as well, and actually let me ask you, when you hear the word or the description of entrepreneur, what comes to your mind when you think of entrepreneurs? Yes, sir.
Creativity.
Creativity, okay. Innovation. Determination. Willingness to take risks. So what you got, I really love that you guys just jumped right to the like descriptions of the entrepreneurs. I was actually thinking, maybe I asked the question wrong, but who do you think of as entrepreneurs? It could be an actual person, or it could just be a type of person. What do you think of when you think of what does an entrepreneur do? Or who do you think of as entrepreneurs?
I think like Mark Zuckerberg having a campus point, like risking it all, risking an idea.
Yeah, risking that great Harvard degree.
So like, I'd say like small business owners.
Small business owners, yeah. Amen.
I kind of envision like a very social and like, I guess, personable person.
Okay.
Like someone that really knows how to, work with people and understand the mindsets of the people that they are, talking to.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
Somebody that's willing to understand like their shortcomings so that they can kind of like try to plan it out.
Great.
I think like the most famous entrepreneurs are the ones that make big bucks, but I think like classifying them in the day-to-day is often people who work for themselves and create their job.
People that work for themselves. Okay. Yeah, so look, I think a lot of times when we think of entrepreneurs, I love a lot of the descriptions you already came up with, but a lot of times also people think of somebody who owns a business or starts a business, right? And I think those are entrepreneurs, right? And they are the lifeblood of our economy. You mentioned small business owners. A small business owner could be a solo entrepreneur, or it could be somebody, who runs a store, who runs a factory, invents a product, sells it, whatever. It could be a lot of different types of services that people provide for other people. But I also want to hopefully convey here that being an entrepreneur in terms of starting a business or leading an organization is a very, very difficult thing, especially the person who starts something and grows it and runs it. They never stop thinking about it. And a lot of those people, they fail. Most small businesses fail in the first 5 years. And so it's very difficult, and it takes over your life. So you might have a family, and the business can be very burdensome on you and your family in terms of starting it and running it, or even just working your way up to being a CEO or something, right? It's a very difficult thing. It's actually, I've come to believe it's really not for anybody, and in fact, it's probably not for most people, which is why most people are not entrepreneurs in that sense. But what I believe is that everybody can build an entrepreneur mindset, and you can apply that to anything you're doing right now, in your life, in your studies, in your work, any job you have. You can be entrepreneurial. You can apply an entrepreneurial mindset, and maybe. I actually believe that you need to build the mindset before you can actually start and run a company, because it's very, very difficult and it's very mentally challenging. And if you don't have what it takes in your mind to do it, like as one of my guests, Claudio Sorrentino, said to me on an episode, he said, no one is going to pat you on the back. If you're somebody who that needs to have a pat on the back, needs to be congratulated for a win, or needs to be consoled during a time of challenge, then don't be an entrepreneur, because no one's coming to pat you on the back. It's all you. And so that's very difficult, and a lot of people it's very difficult for most people to do that. So I'm going to go through 10 common characteristics, and as I go through this, I want you to know that I learned these things after going back, revisiting every single episode and seeing these things really be very apparent in the continuous way that they were offered to me and to my listeners on the podcast, and so really just kind of seeing these come out over and over. But I also want you to think about how you can apply these concepts, how you can learn to be better at each of these areas in whatever you're doing, and hopefully we can have some takeaways on how to better do that. But the first characteristics is that I think first and foremost, entrepreneurs are problem solvers, right? They basically, in fact, oftentimes entrepreneurs discover problems, and a lot of times when the average person sees a problem, they run out the other side of the door because nobody wants to deal with problems, right? We want life to be nice and smooth and easy and relaxing maybe. But the entrepreneur sees a problem, and they see an opportunity to solve it. Now, you can think of problems in very large ways. Mark Zuckerberg's problem was he wanted to meet girls, and so he created Facebook, right? So, but it turned into a bigger opportunity for him than just that. And so you could see a problem that, hey, I don't have time to cut my lawn. And maybe somebody else recognizes this person doesn't have time to cut their own lawn. They need somebody to do it for them, right? So that you create a lawn business, just as simple as that, right? But oftentimes there are bigger problems in life, and that need solving in our world. And so entrepreneurs, the big ones, are solving really, really big problems. But every business is a solution to a problem. And as you can see on some of these slides, I actually discovered a lot more than 10 characteristics, but I tried to group them into 10, with the overarching one being problem solving. Some of the other sort of sub characteristics here is a lot of times they don't, when you're looking at a very big problem, you want to decentralize those problems. You want to start small, because you're not going to solve the whole problem. Oftentimes you want to collaborate with others, because like I said, no one journeys alone, and more minds can come together and be more innovative in finding the solution. Also, in solving a problem, you want to understand you can't solve every problem. Okay, I'm not a scientist, right? I'm not going to solve cancer, right? So that's not for me. So that's someone else's problem. Maybe there's something else I do good that can add value to that problem. But you got to figure out, what are your traits, what are your skill sets, what are your talents, what are your passions, and how can you marry that up with solving the problems that you can solve with your talents. So that's finding your competitive advantage in the marketplace. And when you're solving problems, you're bringing value to others, right? Maybe you're beautifying their lawn, right? Maybe you're giving them a nice haircut, whatever it is. You're solving someone's problem and bringing value to others. And when you do this, one of the other things I found with entrepreneurs, they have a lot of things on their plate. They have a lot of things coming their way. They have to be decisive. They have to learn how to make decisions in solving problems. So as I go through this, I'm going to give you a couple examples of different people that are in the book that have also been on the podcast. This is a good friend of mine, Michael Long. Michael was a problem child, okay? Not when I met him long after this, but he was a juvenile delinquent at one point, literally. And he got in trouble. He had some organizations that took chances on him in their programs. Michael ended up going to college. He went to one of the best public colleges in Florida, New College of Florida. When I met him, I was at an event. I sat next to him at a table, and I learned he was the student body president at New College of Florida when I met him. So again, I tell you, sometimes you meet people. He was only 21, 22 years old when I met him. Point of success, relative, but he was definitely one of the brightest, most successful people in college in the state of Florida when I met him. Not only was he president of New College of Florida, he was the one student that served on what's called the Board of Governors for the state of Florida. They have a Board of Governors that oversees all 12 public universities in Florida, and one student represents all the students in Florida. He was that student. Michael thought after college, he actually went and interned for a congressman up in DC. And after a couple of months, he literally said, "This is not for me. That is not my passion. My passion is I want to help other young people." And when he was in college, he actually started a program where he would pair, it was a mentoring program where college students at New College would go out on these little tiny sailboats, person sailboat, and help young high school students that were troubled kids, help. It was a mentorship program between a college student and high school student. He then grew that after college to what became Sail Future. He used sailing sailing was a passion of his, and he used it as a rehabilitative method to help young people. But I've seen this since 2012 or 2013, whatever, go through many iterations. He realized we had a 2-month program. It wasn't enough. He wanted to expand it to an 18-month program. Then he looked at, there are thousands of kids in the juvenile system in Florida. And there's big bureaucracies that deal with these kids. Department of Juvenile Justice, huge bureaucracy. Michael also saw another side of kids, foster kids. Another department in Florida, the Department of Children and Families, deals with foster kids. Michael said there are a lot of kids intersecting both of these. They're foster kids who are also in the juvenile justice program. That's the kid I want to target. And we're going to have a group home, and we're going to use resources from these departments to help. And we're also going to use resources from private donors to help fund it. He lived 6 kids in a house. Now, we'll go back to, he decentralized the problem. You got thousands of kids. I'm not going to solve all their problems. But how can I learn how to solve the problems for 6 kids? Put a teacher in the house, put a mentor in the house, and they were kind of like big brothers, or almost they called themselves dads, right? Helping the kids. Then he started a second group home once he figured out how to run one. Then he started 2, and a few more. And they're in St. Petersburg, Florida. Last year, I got to visit Sail Future Academy. Now they have a whole academy. They don't just take kids in those 2 programs, but primarily do. It's a private school, and all the kids go there on a scholarship that's a tax credit scholarship program that those kids qualify for. And they're doing amazing things. And so this is one of the most innovative people I know, Michael Long, but really taught me that you've really got to decentralize the problem before you can solve it. And now he's a model. So maybe there are other organizations that will model him, and people will look at him as an example. Number 2 characteristic, entrepreneurs are doers. They are people of action. Really, you can think and write and talk about entrepreneurship and study it all you want, but you actually have to do. And so that, and as soon as you start doing, guess what? You start learning. You learn by doing. You grow through the practice of, right? The things you do over and over and over again. And by the way, the podcast alone is an example of this. Just running a podcast, let me tell you how many hours it took me to put together like the first episode. And if you go back to the audio quality, it wasn't the greatest. And then you do it again, you do it again. Or I would do this over and over. I'm doing the editing, I'm doing the interviewing, I'm setting up the microphones, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to book guests, all these little tasks, they add up to a lot. Now that I'm 138 episodes in, it's like things just run so smoothly. When I have too many people that want to be on my podcast now, but I have a process. And so every entrepreneur goes through these processes, these learnings, and you can apply it from one type of job to another type of job, right? You learn by doing, and it's constant repetition. One of my guests told me, he was a writer. He's a writer, and he said, if you want to write, if you want to be a writer, 2 things you need to do a lot of. You need to just write, no matter how bad you think your writing is, no matter how nervous you are about the person reading it, and you need to read. Learn how to read and learn how to write, and you will become a better writer, and just do it over and over and over again. And the other thing is, when you're learning, I said you learn by doing. Well, you learn through failure too, and that's one of the biggest things I think you can take away is don't be afraid to fail. I had, one of my last episodes that I had, I think it was episode 137. I really encourage you to go to the Agents of Innovation podcast and watch this, because this person is not that much older than you, Michael Saman, and he was part of the team that invented Instagram stories. He developed his first app at the age of 13. He's not in the book because I literally just had him on. But I couldn't believe this kid on the podcast. He's like 27 now, and he's like, I just do things, and I know I'm going to fail. I just want to know how I failed and what learning process. Like I can't believe that somebody so young understands this so well and articulates it way better than I could. When we talk about learning by doing, I had one of these guys here on the podcast, and Keith Aquat here, and his colleague there, Chris Rufo. I had Keith on, and Keith and friends since they were in middle school. They went to college for political science, and I think one of them worked in the State Department, and one of them was working for a member of Congress. Chris was back in Sacramento working for a legislator at one point. But they were friends, and they liked to travel. And they traveled through Asia and some other places, and they would take their camera with them. And they just started making films. They just started meeting people of interest, and this is a good story. And they just made little films, and they made a little bit better film and a little bit better film. And sure enough, they became filmmakers. They never went to school for film at all, ever. They just did it by doing. Their films can be seen on Netflix, Amazon Prime, and PBS. And so they're both actually doing different things now since I had him on the podcast, but they started an organization called something like the Documentary Foundation or something like that. I forget the exact name. But really just another example of just learning by doing. All right, so the third characteristic is entrepreneurs are curious and creative people. Again, they're the kinds of people that like to play with things. They like to experiment. It's really part of the process of trial and error. And again, they're just constantly testing. And when you're testing, you're getting feedback. Maybe it's testing like Thomas Edison, right? Trying to get the incandescent light bulb to work and for people, right? Maybe it's some kind of scientific testing. Maybe it's Elon Musk testing rockets. Great documentary came out a few years ago called, what is it called? It's something I forget, but I think I referenced it in the book. But I watched this documentary, and they're just the early days of SpaceX were a complete and utter catastrophe. They literally almost went under, and they just lucked out. Somebody gave them one more try and put into it, and but they were testing in every situation, and so you could look at testing that way, but you could test other things, right? Any kind of business, you should always be testing and getting feedback. Start small, just like Michael Long. You start small and you figure out what works, what doesn't work, and then you apply it to the next iteration of your product or your business. And you want to carve out time to do speculative stuff, and don't worry if just you might take a few hours on a Thursday morning to say, I'm just going to try this, and if it doesn't work, fine. I'm not going to feel like I wasted my time because that was my time of the week to just try stuff. So carve out time for that. And sometimes when you're testing and you're curious and you're asking questions, you will maybe stumble upon some serendipity. Maybe you're going to come across something that you create that you didn't even think about creating. It just happened along the way. Well, the people who started Instagram, that's actually what happened. They didn't, what they were creating, they were trying to create an app for, what was that? They were trying to create an app for video games or something, and it wasn't working out for them. But along the way, they discovered this idea that people would just want to post pictures, right, and share pictures. And of course, Instagram has evolved a lot since then, since the very beginning. Twitter was the same way. Twitter was supposed to be an app to help people connect with podcasts, early days of podcasting. And it turned out, it turned out we might have gotten a president out of Twitter, maybe two. But it turns out people wanted to share ideas and thoughts and lots of other things other than just podcasts. So you'll experience some serendipity and maybe become an accidental entrepreneur, kind of like these two young women, Danielle Casey and Danny Mitchell. They were both graphic design artists, and so they have that artist mindset, right? They're constantly creating. Really, that's literally their job, is creative artist. So not everybody has that kind of job when it comes to creativity. But Danny was getting married, and she was looking to be creative in her wedding venue. A lot of young women maybe want to get married in a nice church or some banquet hall or someplace beautiful on the beach or something like that. She was like, I want to create my own, I want to have a place where I'm going to create my own wedding venue. So where did she go? She went to some abandoned warehouse in an industrial area of West Palm Beach, Florida. And she saw it as a blank canvas where she could create her own designs for her own wedding. And she did that. But while doing that, they were like, what's going on in this? Look at what we did. We beautified this old industrial warehouse. They're artists. They know that a lot of other artists don't have time to sell their stuff. They don't really want to be in that part. They want to just be working on their art. So they said, why don't we do this? Why don't we take this old industrial warehouse that we just beautified and actually have it as a space for artists, and they can all have their own little space and they don't have to be here. We will be here, or we'll hire somebody to be here to attend to the sales. And once a week, maybe on the weekend, they'll all get together as all the artists, like for a couple hours, so they could all be there collaboratively. They put food trucks outside. Once a month, they put a band outside. They had some fun with it. But that was great. So the artists could sell their stuff and still work on their art and not have to be there in a store, as a salesperson. So again, they just kind of lucked into this type of experience and role. And I think that's what it's funny, so many times on my podcast, I started hearing people, the entrepreneur themselves, who I just listened to them talk about how hard they worked, all the years they put into this or this or this. And then a lot of times they would use the term luck. Oh, I got lucky. And I'm like, what are you talking about, you got lucky? I just heard all the years of experience and all the things you went through. You didn't get lucky. But I started realizing, I think they used that term because so many of them had many things that failed. And by the time they get to the point where they succeeded at something, they look at it as a lucky break. But maybe what they don't realize is actually that serendipity that sometimes happens when you're doing things over and over again and trying new things and trying to put your talents and skills out there. So I think they're kind of emblematic of that as well. So the fourth characteristic is they're formed by experiences. And so for me, this also means that you should be looking at having a wide variety of experiences in life. I just met somebody 2 weeks ago, and I've heard this from other people before. I know sometimes it's good to say no to things because we don't have time to do everything. But this person said sometimes when an opportunity presents itself, consider saying yes. And this person told me I like to say yes to as many things as possible. But one of the great easy things that you can think about when it comes to experiences, I mean, it's one of the most apparent to me, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs, is people who have a strong work ethic. Now you've reached college age. I hope maybe some work ethic has been instilled in you by now, but whether it has or not, we could always be acquiring more of a work ethic. But this is also really good for young people and for kids, especially with first jobs and things like that, because you're gonna learn immediately how hard work actually is, the value of a dollar, and that something is not just given to you, right? And that you actually have to work for it. But also, you can learn something from every job. Whether I've had jobs. I had a job in college working at Taco Bell. I worked telemarketing and also for AT&T. Some of those things, a lot of the types of things that you do during those jobs and the people you interface with, it's not always fun, right? I worked at Disney World. I loved Disney World. I just wasn't paid very much, but I loved being there. But I learned so much from my job at Disney about customer service. Disney is a pro at customer service, and they're such a pro. They don't call them customers, right? They call them guests, right? They have all sorts of terms. I could do a whole lecture on Disney, but all these little things add up over time, and they teach you something. They teach you how to treat people. They teach you how to deal with lots of personalities. So work experience, as much work experience as you get, even if it's something that will never relate to a future ideal job or career you have, any kind of work experience I think is really formative. And you see that over and over again. But also, I'm a big traveler. A lot of the people I've been on my podcast, I noticed a lot of them had travel experiences over the course of life that really opened them up to think outside the box, to see the world from a different perspective, and really just kind of get outside their bubble. And so I think travel experiences are really formative. I have a travel component in Fearless Journeys, which also gives good elements to the name Fearless Journeys. But part of that is I like to travel, and so find a business that you like to do things and have people pay for it. But also, I just think that when you get people outside of their normal day-to-day, just that act alone of going somewhere helps people just to think with a fresh perspective. But also when you could go somewhere where it's a totally different environment, maybe it's a different country, maybe people speak a different language, they have different customs, you learn so much more that the world is a lot bigger than the area maybe you grew up in. And so I think that's great. And I had a woman on my podcast, Karen Hoffman, who's really emblematic of these things in so many ways. First of all, when I've known Karen now 10, 12 years, I met her through kind of my role in public policy. She was basically helping her mother for 20, 30 years run a student travel agency. So they took tens of thousands of students every year to places like Washington, D.C., Orlando, St. Augustine, Philadelphia, all these places, and they had a really fantastic business. And Karen was also, she helped start a sort of like a trade association for student travel operators in Florida. And then she became like the president of it. And got to interface with so many public policy leaders, legislators, governors, all sorts of people. And so she went to that world. And so I met her when she was doing those sorts of things. And then she became really good at knowing how to talk to those people in the legislative process. But Karen is such a personable person. She's so well connected to so many different people. Kind of knew her about that. But you start to peel back Karen's story. When she was 13 years old, her parents moved. She grew up, I think, in Indiana. Her parents moved to Mexico City when she was 13 years old to Salvation Army Orphanage. And then Karen went to the American School in Mexico City at 13 years old, and you can imagine this was like in the 1980s too. She's getting on a bus by herself at 13, going across Mexico City to go to the American School. She's coming home. Her parents are dealing with the orphanage. She's learning how to cook, to clean, to take care of the household, she learned so much stuff from that experience in Mexico City. She also learned to speak Spanish. She's not 100% fluent, but she knows a pretty good amount of Spanish. She comes back to Boca Raton. They had moved to Florida. She comes back to Boca Raton, Florida, and she felt like she was just like totally different than all the other kids. You know, like nobody else had these kinds of experiences. She also worked a job at Publix, a grocery store in Florida, the greatest grocery store known to mankind. And she, as a cashier at 16 years old, she's teaching, or she's learning also different personalities, how to deal with lots of different people. So once I start to like learn Karen's backstory, I'm like, oh, this explains Karen, the Karen I know, the Karen I met when she was 50 years old. So you hear about that. Now, Karen and her mother had this business, and COVID happened, right? This was like a very, very successful business. But there's two things you didn't want to be in when COVID happened. Anything to do with education or travel. And they were in both, and they went out of business. Because one of the things Karen told me was, it doesn't matter how successful you are as an entrepreneur, there are no guarantees. But Karen is a big-time traveler. She had that young travel experience. But one of the things she told me about getting more experiences, and I put this on here, and the quote is in the book. It's a much better quote than I can remember off the top of my head. But basically she said, when you're out getting experiences in life, it could be a travel experience, it could be a work experience, it could be a voluntary experience, whatever, your school experience, it's like a pegboard with hooks. You have a pegboard that's on a slant, and you're putting hooks on it. And then when new information comes into your life, the new content you're getting, it now has context so that if you didn't have those hooks with all those experiences, that new content would just slide right off. You wouldn't even get it. But now that you've had so many experiences, you have more context, and more things can come to your mind, and more ideas can come to your mind, and ways to actually like put things into action and execute. Okay, so the next characteristic is that entrepreneurs are fearless. All right, they're bold, they're courageous. They are oftentimes doing the unknown, and they embrace it. Right? They are comfortable getting uncomfortable. Right? They get outside their comfort zone a lot. They're also the kind of people that are not content with the status quo, and they have a lot of these characteristics that some of you guys have said. They persevere through a lot of tough things. They build that endurance to do so, and they're willing to challenge themselves constantly. A good friend of mine who I had on the podcast too is like my best friend. He had told me he likes to do something uncomfortable every day. It could be, instead of passing by that homeless guy on the street where he lives in Denver, there's a lot of homeless people, having a conversation with one. That could be something uncomfortable, right? It could just be doing, he was at an event and somebody said, we need volunteers to help mentor young men. Okay, I didn't really feel like doing that, but I'm gonna do that. So he likes to challenge himself every day. And when you're constantly challenging yourself, you're constantly learning, you're putting yourself out there, and it could be giving a talk, it could be public speaking, things like that. Constantly doing those sorts of things. But the one thing with these entrepreneurs that I think is really emblematic when it comes to fearless, they understand that there are risks to things they do, but they don't care, they do it anyway. Now, when I was starting Fearless Journeys, I had come up in 2020. I had gone through some branding sessions with a friend of mine. We created this whole concept of what this company was going to be, and we even had a name that we got to after understanding what the feel of the company we wanted to convey. And so I was just telling a few people in the late summer, early fall of 2020 about the concept. Maybe they could be helpful, and also just wanted to see what they thought. And also I was telling them the name. And one of these guys was a guy named Matt Thomas. He's not in the book, but he'll be in the next one. And he has a charity called Brawl for a Cause. He literally gets people in a boxing ring that are not boxers. They're like you and me. Maybe somebody here is a boxer, but let's pretend Dr. Greg and I, we're both very passionate about particular charities, right? Maybe I'm passionate about a charity to help kids in juvenile justice. Maybe he's passionate about helping solve, breast cancer, whatever. And instead of just going, maybe some people might go do a marathon and they get, people to support them. They're going to run, 26 miles to help people with cancer. Well, instead of doing that, Matt said, why don't we get people in a boxing ring? So if now Francisco is literally brawling for a cause, and he's going to brawl against Dr. Greg. We're literally going to get a real boxing match in front of a live audience. And that, by the way, I went to one of these. There was like 30 boxers, 15 boxing matches. They were legit. I saw 2 knockouts. These were people that are not boxers in their daily life, but Matt puts them through like a 2-month training program to get them at least somewhat prepared. And what's cool is all the different charities, they're now all in the same room. So they bring their own group of people, and they're knocks each other out either on the chessboard or in the boxing ring wins. Well, a few months after I had Matt on the podcast in 2018, he went to India and fought in the World Chess Boxing Championships. First American to do so, first American to win the gold. So he was actually a chess boxing championship. I give you that context to Matt because Matt is also an entrepreneur and somebody I think of as fearless. Somebody I think is bold and courageous. The guy's willing to get in a boxing ring and fly halfway around the world to compete against foreigners in this new sport. And I'm walking around Atlanta with him in September of 2020, and I'm giving him my concept for Fearless Journeys. And Matt says, I love everything you're doing. I don't like the name of the company, Fearless Journeys. I said, why not? He goes, Francisco, nobody is fearless. Nobody is truly fearless. Everybody has some level of fear. And it kind of struck me like almost like I got punched in the face because I said, wait, hold on a second. Matt Thomas doesn't like this name? Maybe I'm not doing something right here. And I got on a plane back to Orlando and I was actually thinking about this, and that night I'm like typing into Webster's or whatever, like what is the actual definition of fearless? And obviously it was without fear. That was the first one. The other ones are bold and courageous. And I started thinking about it. So, well, this is where we got this word from. We want to embolden people on their journey. But then I started thinking, okay, who do I think of as the kind of people who are fearless? And literally this is the image that came to my mind. These guys getting off the boat in Normandy on D-Day, and we've all, you've probably seen Saving Private Ryan. You saw the bullets and the bombs and the smoke and everything coming their way. And I thought, those are the people I think of as fearless. But then I started thinking about what they were experiencing. And I thought, oh my gosh, all those people had to have fear at that moment, right? But what did they do? They kept moving forward anyway because there was no other choice. And luckily for all of us, we get to experience the freedom that they helped preserve. So I texted Matt back, called him or something, and I said, hey, by the way, I really want to thank you for bringing this to my attention because I really hadn't given this word deep enough thought, and you're right, everybody has fear, even these guys on D-Day had fear. But we're going to keep the name of the company because everybody has fear. And we want to inspire people to be as fearless as possible. And really to understand that fear is a natural human emotion that we all experience. It's an evolutionary thing too. When you're standing at the top of a cliff and your stomach starts to turn, it's a little bit because your body is trying to save you. It's trying to warn you and give you the things. Those are real fears, real natural fears. What we want to prevent is the fears that we create inside our own heads. Oh, if I leave my try to start a company, I might go broke. Like, okay, maybe, okay, but what's the worst thing that can happen? Are you going to die? So trying to think, I always try to ask myself that question. If I take this action, what is the worst thing that can happen? Write that down. And then realize it might not be that bad, and so that's really something to try to inspire people. But really, entrepreneurs are the kind of people, they see something that nobody else does. Nobody else has tried before. They want to corner that market, produce a new product, create a new invention, whatever it is, sell that thing, and everybody else might be telling them they're crazy, they're foolish, whatever, but they have something called faith, and they do take that leap of faith and go after it. All right, speaking of, this is a guy I think of as fearless as well. John Morris. I knew John before he was in a wheelchair. He was a student at Florida State University when I was living in Tallahassee. He had graduated. He had a graduate degree in history. He went to St. Louis, and he went into a Teach for America program. This guy was a crazy traveler when I knew him when he was 22 years old. And he would be on planes all the time, going places, posting on Facebook where he was, and he loved to rack up the miles and take these crazy routes. But sadly, he was driving back from from St. Louis back to Florida, and he was passing through Atlanta, fell asleep at the wheel, and his car burst. He had his car on cruise control, 70 miles an hour. It hit a rail. It burst into flames. The first responders got there and thought whoever's in this car is dead. Luckily, he was not dead, but he was in a coma for like 2 months. Very lucky for him, he was where he got into the accident was very close to Grady Hospital in Atlanta, one of the best burn units in the country. So almost his entire body was burned. After like 6 months after the accident, he amputated 2 of his legs and 1 of his hands, so he's a triple amputee. Great thing, John survived. Sad thing was like, man, this guy's never gonna be able to live the life he lived before, especially with all the travel, and I'm a big traveler, so I relate to that. So it's kind of sad, like what do next and all these things. Well, John is emblematic of somebody who said, I'm going to keep moving forward. That accident happened in, I believe it was 2012 or 2013. He was in the hospital recovering for about a year and a half. As soon as he got out of the hospital, he flew to the Rose Bowl in a wheelchair and went to see his team, Florida State University, win a national championship. He went to the Great Wall of China on his wheelchair. He has now been to over 50 countries in the last 10 years in his wheelchair. He started a company called Wheelchair Travel, where he actually writes and blogs about how people with disabilities can travel to different places. So he talks about those places. He has even done some group trips with people in wheelchairs. He was just named like a month ago, one of the top people by one of these disability magazines. Really just amazing story. So just to think of how no matter, the types of obstacles that you're put in your way, your 2 legs are taken, your hand is taken, you're put in a wheelchair, but you like to travel, he did it anyway and kept moving forward. Entrepreneurs, listeners, and they are the kind of people that are just alert to opportunities. So listening is a good skill to have when someone is talking and trying to learn and trying to listen, but also when I say listen and I say alert to opportunities, you also might really try to understand what people are expressing, the needs they are expressing, and try to use your expertise to help them in some way. Like I said, finding that competitive advantage, where can you meet a need? And part of this is just paying attention to what those people are expressing and working to fulfill their needs, and hopefully ways to get paid as well. So somebody here who did something entrepreneurial, this guy named Chris Gonzales, no relation to me. He also lived in Orlando when I was living in Orlando. And Chris, he worked for basically a veterans organization in like the healthcare area and things like that. But he, like me, were both huge fans of live music. And one day a friend of his called him and said, hey, it was like a random Tuesday night, where can I find out where live music is playing tonight in Orlando? Not just like who's playing the Arena, but like a big, huge concert, but who's playing at the little pub over here or a little concert hall over there? And Orlando's a big, broad area. He was like, I don't know. Well, most people would have said, I don't know, hung up the phone and gone back to whatever they were doing on Tuesday night. Chris was like, I wonder how we can find that information out and deliver that information to people like my friend and myself who might be looking for live music on a random Tuesday night in Orlando. So he ended up figuring out a way to finding all these different venues, coordinating all the information, coordinating with all the local artists, all these sorts of things. Over time, just a little thing. Started an Instagram page, a Facebook page, a website, orlandomusiclive.com. And he's got a crazy calendar and people can post. He has ways for artists to self-post, for venues to post, all these sorts of things. And he really found a way, again, to listen and be alert to an opportunity that other people might be looking for. This is not something that pays his salary, but like I said, it's something entrepreneurial that he does. And when the pandemic happened and all of live music was shut down, guess what? Chris became a life source to a lot of venues and a lot of artists locally who were trying to still connect with their fans, and they were able to do that through some of the things he was doing at Orlando Music Live. Okay, so entrepreneurs are also versatile, right? They have the ability to shift or pivot. They're willing to be flexible. Again, be rigid in your thinking. There are going to be a lot of unexpected things that happen. I mentioned what happened to John Morris, right? I mentioned what happened to Karen Hoffman and her business. By the way, you could read the book and talk the rest of the story of Karen Hoffman, and she's really used all those experiences now to start a company that basically connects education and industry and tries to help the people in industry and education, basically people in the educational areas learn what are the needs the industries in Florida need that we should be educating people on, and also helping the people in the industries learn how to communicate better to the people in the educational fields, how to get talent, right? So, and then she's working with state lawmakers. She even has a contract with Space Florida to help with the technical needs that people in the space industry need. And help connect that to some of the educational institutions in Florida. So she used all that vast variety of experiences to do what she's doing now and really flourishing. So you got to be able to pivot. Nobody saw a pandemic, a worldwide shutdown coming, but everybody had to respond to it in some way. And so companies responded in a lot of different ways. Some survived because of the way they responded. Some, even despite the response might have been good, they had no way to survive anyway, right? But the thing is, the ones that survived, and also the entrepreneurs or even the people that were able to pivot, maybe do something else, the ones that now they're thriving in different areas as well. So the biggest thing is be willing to adapt to the circumstances of everything and be versatile. Somebody who's been emblematic of that I've known is a guy named John Crossman. He was on one of my earlier episodes. I got to know him because the first time I met him, I was basically, somebody introduced me to him to pitch him to be a donor to one of the organizations I was working for, and he did, but I got to know John, and I said, hey, you're doing really great stuff. So him and his brother had a commercial real estate company called Crossman and Company, and at the point I met him, they were the largest leaser of commercial real estate in Florida and one of the largest in the Southeast. Almost every public shopping center in Florida is leased to Publix by Crossman and Company. Like they have the majority of them. So that's a very successful guy, very philanthropic guy as well. But a few years later, so first of all, when I first had John on the podcast and explaining all this, he gave me a really interesting term to think about, or a really theme to think about, and that is at different points in life you could be doing something different. He called them, there are different seasons of life. And in different seasons, you might be very focused on one thing and maybe something you like and you're passionate about. In a different season, you might be doing something else. And just an example for him was, he said, I'm very passionate about college football. But when I met him, his daughters were about 10 or 12 years old. And he said, when my daughters were born, I no longer watch college football because I work all week and I like to spend time with my family on the weekends. And I had two little kids at home, and they were also girls, and they weren't into football, I guess. But he wanted to spend the time with his family. And so that was just something he had to sacrifice for that season of his life. Something that maybe for 20 years earlier, he was super passionate about. He had to kind of give that up. So that was just a small example that he was explaining. Also, he would sometimes try to take his daughter and wife to some of his work events and things like that, where he could, if he was tied up somewhere in the evening, trying to understand, different things. Years after I had him on the podcast, I noticed John had announced that he was retiring. Now, this guy's like, when he announced that, he was like maybe 50 years old. And I'm like, I know these entrepreneurs, they don't retire at 50 years old, even if they're successful. And he lived in a pretty modest home for the success he had. And I reached out to him, I said, John, what's going on? I was like, you're retiring? What? And I said, what happened? And he goes, well, he says, my wife and my mother are both going through some serious health issues right now. I'm pretty well set for a while. So I really just want to spend the time with them. And nobody else was really available to take care of his mother, so he wanted to do that. He also was extremely busy, by the way, with all these philanthropic things he was doing. He also wrote a book. So he had like this, and I'm also going to be doing more investment. He's really big into historically black colleges and universities, helping establish real estate programs there and all these sorts of things. So he wanted to get more invested in all that. And he did. So that's what he was juggling in that season of his life. Now, a few years later, his wife and mother actually came out of their health issues. John went and started a new company, started another venture where it helps him do a lot more public speaking and things like that. Now his daughters are also in college, so I'm actually wondering if John's going to get back to watching more college football. So anyway, but that's a thing to understand, is being willing to be flexible and adaptable when the circumstances call on it, and understanding it maybe in some ways too as a different season of your life. One other characteristic here for entrepreneurs is they're very intentional about everything they do. They're very detail oriented. They have big emphasis on quality control. They're very intentional about building relationships with people. They're very intentional about really everything they do. They're intentional about their brand, especially in this day of social media, right? How do you represent yourself online, right? Maybe how do you represent your business? How do you represent your personal self? All these sorts of things. And so they're very, very intentional. One of the things they're most intentional about is managing their time. One of the things you notice when you meet a lot of very successful entrepreneurs, they just have so many things they're responsible for, but also so many people demand their attention, and they have to really be very intentional about what they do with every hour of their day. And so a lot of them are very good at time management or time blocking or things like that. You know, how much time am I going to spend in the inbox versus how much time am I going to be out, you know, making sales or whatever, right? Being very intentional. Being intentional about how they build themselves. Maybe it's going to conferences to learn. Maybe it's taking retreats. Maybe it's meditation. Maybe it's intentional about their physical health, right? You can't be successful if you're not personally healthy, right? So it's a lot of different things that you have to really be intentional about. And also being consistent. You know, they're the kind of people that do the same things over and over and over again, and they're consistent maybe in their values. Look, I talked about Disney, all right? Look how, one of the challenges for Disney recently is some people don't think they're consistent with their values, right? Reaching kids and things like that, and some of the things that they're promoting. But that's interesting, because a lot of other film companies and things like that could be making the same films as Disney, maybe, you know, morally worse, let's put it that way, morally questionable films. But this is Disney's brand, and this is what's problematic for Disney at this moment, right? So that's, you got to understand your customer, and I think most successful entrepreneurs, they're very consistent in the types of things they do over and over again. And a lot of them are also very intentional about their own philanthropy, because they get, believe me, when you're an entrepreneur in a lot of different circles, and maybe you're making a lot of money, and people want you to give to their thing and be at their event and do all these things, you got to be very intentional about how you do your own philanthropy as well. Also, obviously, when it comes to intentionality, they're very punctual, they're very reliable as well. People can count on them. And this is something you could do just in any job, right? Showing up on time, being a consistent, good, valued worker. And when you are, people will want to promote you, other people will notice you, and maybe want to hire you as well. This guy, Will Dowell, actually, he literally just stepped down from his role recently as the CEO of a really great nonprofit called Behind Every Door. They go out and really help serve people in poverty in really some tough neighborhoods in Dallas. But one of the things I could get a lot of things from Will Dowell. Very, very creative, innovative person. He's worked in the for-profit sector. He's run this nonprofit. He's now about to go, you know, I think back and doing some stuff in the for-profit area again. But he said something to me about the organization. He said, our organization is focused on the people we serve, not on becoming a big bureaucratic organization. I thought he was very intentional in that little comment about building an organization centered around people and not building a big organization. He said, we're not going to have a big organization with like 100 people working for us. We're going to be very intentional about the people we serve and build those people, not build a big organization. So everybody's got a different thing that they want to do, but that was what his intention with that organization was. Okay, I think we have two more characteristics here. Lifelong learners. So your education is not limited to the classroom. And that's a big takeaway. One of the things I note, if you at my podcast, I feel like almost every episode, just organically, you'll hear the person on the other end cite an author or a book that's been formative to them. And this just happens. And these people, they're readers. And whether they read a lot of books or not, they're always learning. That might be learning by going to a conference. It might be learning by just, financial people read the Wall Street Journal. And they don't just read it because they want to see the stocks, right? That used to be what they had to do in the old days before computers. They're reading it to look at the trends. They're reading it to look at what leaders in business are doing, all these sorts of things, right? So whatever you're kind of involved with, always be learning. We are blessed to live in a day and age where we have the Agents of Innovation podcast and a million other podcasts. We're blessed to live with YouTube. You know how many things now I can fix around the house by just typing it into YouTube, right? We should all experiment with doing those things, right? Like just try to do little things that you could do on your own. Maybe it's fixing a problem on your computer by typing something in that you know how many times I've actually called somebody about like, hey, do you know how to do this? And a lot of times the answer is, hey, you could just put that in YouTube and there'll be a video about it. And there's like thousands of videos on these things. So we live in a day and age where we have the ability to learn on our own. We do need wise guides like Dr. Greg, but also there are a lot of other ways. I think one of the biggest everybody should have is you should always have mentors that you're learning from. And so find a mentor. You can figure it out. There's a lot of ways you can. That's a whole nother lecture. But I think finding mentors, and your mentors may change over time, right? And in fact, Dr. Greg and I were having discussions today about somebody who was a mentor to him for many years. And then I discovered Dr. Greg because of somebody he was a mentor to for many years. And so mentorship is also great because you can pass the baton a little bit and you have all these connections of different people that you have. A lot of people are joining mastermind communities. Some are joining Fearless Journeys. We have mentors, we have guides, things like that. But always be building a network, because one of the biggest things you could see with entrepreneurs, in addition to reading and all these things I mentioned, they have a network. And you only get a network when you step out of your comfort zone and you go to a conference that you don't know anybody, you go on an experience where you don't know anybody, and you start building those relationships. That's what I love about what I do with my travel experiences, with our trips. Some of the people know some people, but most people, when they came on a first Fearless Journeys trip, they didn't know anybody. Maybe they might have come with a spouse or a significant other, but they didn't know anybody else, and they came away from those trips with lifelong friends, and now they're going on multiple trips with those people as well. So also, biggest thing, and I really love, I haven't seen a single person on a device in here. This is one of the rare classrooms that this happens. So kudos to Dr. Greg or whoever forced you not to look at your devices. Maybe you have and I haven't seen it. Actually, I saw you looking at one, Dr. Greg. You were looking at how much time is Francisco going to keep talking. But disconnect. Take some time away from your devices and disconnect. Practice meditation. Maybe it's prayer. All these sorts of things. And take time to reflect and disconnect. That is something that I see a lot of entrepreneurs do as well. And incorporating mindfulness into every part of your day. And that really does help you build a great mindset. Chris Mueller, professional soccer player and author, an example of a lifelong learner. It's odd that I include a Major League Soccer player in my book. I had him on the podcast in 2020. It was an incredible episode. I absolutely was a big fan of him, and he was playing for the Orlando City, which was my team, and now he's playing for the Chicago Fire. But in the early days of the pandemic, I was following Chris on some social media just as, a fan of the athlete. And he's always very motivational with a lot of his tweets, but he sent out a thing saying he was going to be starting a book club. This is before I started Fearless Journeys, which now has a book club too. But I thought, wow, he's starting a book club. That's great. So I went on the thing. I signed up for his book club. I got an automatic email. Thank you for joining. We'll be in touch soon on the next book we're going to read, blah, blah, blah. Well, I saw that email and I looked at the email and I said, gosh, it looks like he actually might check that email. He was 23 years old at the time. He was 3 years into his professional soccer career. And so I sent an email. I asked him if he could be on my podcast. I told him, I said, I think it's great, everything you're doing outside of soccer, with trying to inspire people, especially during this crazy time when the world was kind of going crazy for a few months there. And anyway, yeah, he agreed to come on the podcast. It was a great interview. All the things he was talking about, I could clearly tell he's reading a lot of the same books I'm reading. But I think it was just super interesting learning his story, and that actually he said, as much as soccer had always been part of his life, it helped him when his parents went through a divorce. He could go out and kick the soccer ball. But he always had, when you're in soccer, right, you always have coaches and other teammates and things like that. Well, when the pandemic started, guess what? They were all quarantined. Now he had to go practice on his own, go dribble balls around cones by his own, and he really had to self-motivate. But when he was in college, somebody introduced him to a thing called a book. He was never a reader. So he started reading some books, got really inspired by reading, and just started reading one book after another, and just realizing how much we can learn from all these people that spend, literally, they have years of experience, maybe months or years writing the book, and in a number of hours you can soak up all that wisdom from that person. I mean, just think of all the information, that all the experiences that those people had to go through, and you could just soak it up in a few hours by reading their book. So that's what really got him into reading, and you could just tell when I was interviewing him in June of 2020, Major League Soccer had been sidelined like every other sport, but they were thinking about doing an MLS, I forget what they called it, MLS is Back tournament, and it was in the bubble over at the Disney. They brought all the teams. Well, it's funny, I remember I got off that podcast thinking, man, this guy is in such a good mindset. He's doing his self-training. He told me he was playing card games against his fiance just to try to stay competitive. He was just like, and obviously starting a book club and all these things. Well, he comes at it. I asked him a couple questions on that podcast in June of 2020. I said asking about some of his goals. He said, well, Orlando City's never made the playoffs in their 6 or 7 years of existence. I'd love us to make the playoffs. I've never played for my country. I'd love to play for my country one day. And so those were like two of his goals. And obviously he probably had he was already engaged, so he was going to be getting married. And then he also said, my life goals, I'd like to start a family, things like that. So, by the way, he came out of that MLS's Back tournament, played so good in the first 2 games. He was named player of the game in the first 2 games. Orlando City went to the final of that tournament, and it was really great because they weren't really one of the top 10 teams in the league. They go back into the regular season. He becomes one of the leading scorers on the team that season. In fact, for a period, he was the leading scorer on the team. And they make the playoffs. They win a playoff game. I was actually there. It was amazing. And then after the season's over, in December of 2020, he was called up to the U.S. men's national team. Now, one of the things I get from that is you have to visualize something before you can achieve it. You may not achieve it, but you really got to believe it, visualize it, set it in your mind. And also, a lifelong learner is the kind of person who's going to try to control what they can control and not worry about what the hell else is happening in the world around them. They're going to just focus on what can I do to control my situation. And so that's what he did. By the way, he also got married in December of 2020. 6 months ago from right now, he just had his first kid. We did a Fearless Journeys live session with him last week. By the way, I should also mention, in 2021, he wrote a book, published it, called Bet on Yourself. And we just used that book in the Fearless Journeys community. So he came on the live session and did that. And by the way, he got injured 9 months ago. He hadn't played a game in 9 months. And he was on a session with us on a Thursday, and his first game back was on Saturday. So I thought, here's also a guy who's living up to his creed of learning from others and also sharing your knowledge with others. And he was willing to dedicate an hour of his time with our community. So I thought that was great. And I told him, I said, you're no longer Orlando City, but we're going to still cheer for you. But anyway, that's an example of somebody who is a lifelong learner. And if a Major League Soccer player can take some time to start a book club, everybody can be a lifelong learner. And I also asked him, I said, how do you have the time to write books? I mean, you're so focused on he said, we would have 30 minutes in a coffee shop between something, and I would spend time just writing, physically writing. And he says he's got volume 2 ready to come out soon too. So, but the final thing I got to say about entrepreneurs is they are motivated by love and passion. If you don't, I'm going to go back to the original idea of an entrepreneur, somebody who starts a business, runs a business, they're dedicating their life to something. There are a lot of ways to make money, and entrepreneurs are not really motivated by money because there are a lot of ways to make money. Now, you need to make money to survive. Money also validates what you're doing, right? If no one's buying your product or your service, probably not providing a value, competitive advantage that you're going to be successful with. So you need the money, don't get me wrong. But that's not the primary motivation. The primary motivation is where we went to the beginning. They see problems in the world that they want to be a part of solving. They want to be part of bringing value to other people. Walt Disney wanted to make kids happy, right? Things like that. Elon Musk wants to land on Mars, right? The mission of SpaceX is literally, do you know what their mission, their little theme is, their motto? It's making life multiplanetary. That is their mission. Are they making money right now off making life multiplanetary? No. They're making money off of Starlink. All right? They're sending rockets into space 3 or 4 times a week right now. And they are providing internet service to the world because that's something that happens serendipitously along the way to making life multiplanetary. But they have all these people working for SpaceX that are so motivated. They want in their lifetime to see somebody on Mars. Elon Musk doesn't want to just see somebody on Mars. He literally wants to put 100,000 people on Mars. Maybe it was 1 million. It was some crazy number. He literally wants to colonize Mars. That's a big, audacious goal. He may not reach it, but he's going to do a lot of great things along the way of that goal because he's motivated by that passion. And so entrepreneurs are people that are very passionate about what they do. These are the kind of people that work 70 or 80 hours a week. My guest, Claudio, again, told me, he said, an entrepreneur, he's not the first one to say this, but he's repeating this mantra. An entrepreneur is somebody who'll work 80 hours a week so they don't have to work 40 hours a week for someone else, right? But they're the kind of people that, if you're going to work 80 hours a week, you better love what you do. You better be passionate about what you're doing it. So that's why I say they got to be motivated by love and passion. And so maybe your motivation is to solve problems. Maybe your motivation is to create jobs for people. Maybe it's to serve people. Maybe it's to be your own boss. But you got to be in love with that passion, whatever it is that you're doing. And ultimately, it's not money that you're motivated by. This young man, I met him. He's one of the few people that was not living in the United States. I actually met him on an entrepreneurship summit. I went in the island of Bermuda. Really beautiful place. Actually, that guy I told you about, Matt Thomas, the Brawl for a Cause guy, he invited me to a conference that him and his business partner were putting on entrepreneurship in November of 2019. I'm so glad I went. Because I had a crazy busy travel year in 2019, and I was like, I don't know, but Bermuda, all the pictures look beautiful, and I don't know if I want to spend the money to go there, but I'll go. Anyway, you go places, you meet people. One of the people I met was this guy, Nate Amaral. I met him and the girl he was dating at the time, and they were just performers at the conference. He had a laser light show company. He had a photo booth company. They were doing this fire dancing thing for our conference. So his motivation was entertaining people. Now he went to school in Canada for college, came back to Bermuda, started working for an insurance company in Bermuda. Bermuda is the #1, what do you call it? It's like the global headquarters for insurance and reinsurance. It's like the risk capital of the world, which I think is also interesting, using the word risk when it comes to entrepreneurship. And he had a good job. It was paying him fine. He was totally bored. About a year or two after doing that job, he was like, I want to do something in entertainment. And his first thing is he wanted to start a fireworks company. Except the government of Bermuda is like, they really don't like fireworks. Total opposite of a place I spent a lot of time in, Guatemala. They will just light fireworks every part of the day. So he was like, I can't do this. So what did he do? He pivoted. And he started a laser light show company instead to entertain people. Nate told me about, on that podcast, about going from that insurance company where he had a set paycheck, a nice job, the job that the college degree was kind of for. He said, my goal is not to make money. My goal is freedom. My goal is to wake up every morning and have the freedom to do the thing I want to do, the thing I love to do, and money is just the tool that I need to do that. It's just the tool to get me that freedom. I've got to be able to make a living to be able to do this thing, so how can I provide my value to other people? So when it comes to, the American dream, I think it actually comes back to this guy in Bermuda's statement to me about it all comes down to freedom. I think that's the thing that interlocks what the American dream is all about, is finding, your parents might have come here because they were searching, maybe it was for political freedom, maybe it was for economic freedom. That's why a lot of immigrants come here. I've spent a lot of time, particularly in Latin America. I lived in Guatemala for a year as I was starting this company. I was teaching at a free market university there. But we see, my dad's from Cuba originally, so I understand. One of the things I see is right now there's a lot of anxieties in the United States. But every single one of these immigrants that comes here, and I meet a lot of them in Florida, they're either my Uber driver or they're the lawn guy or whatever, and they are working ridiculous numbers of hours. I literally ran into a guy. I was coming out of my friend had a little house party with a live band at a nice area of Delray Beach. It was like a Sunday night. I was leaving her house at like 10 o'clock. I'm driving down the street and there's a car parked like kind of in my way, and he's like, you'd see there's somebody in it. And I was like, what is going on here? I was actually on the phone with a friend as I was coming out of the house. I told my friend, hold on, I gotta see this guy's having some kind of issue. It was like a nice neighborhood. I don't know if I would get out of the car in some neighborhoods, but I was like, hey, and he didn't speak like almost any, he actually didn't speak any English. I speak some Spanish, so we were able to communicate a little bit. But I figured out, and he was in a normal car, his own car. Well, he was an Amazon driver. I actually didn't know until that moment that there's a lot of Amazon drivers that do stuff out of their own vehicles. And he was trying to figure out, trying to leave this package at this house, but this house had like a gate. And and I said, I think you just ring that little bell thing. And he's like, and he had the instructions, and I could read the instructions that he had on his Amazon thing that said to type in a little code or something. These people, and where he could leave it, because the doorstep was up there, but the gate was here. But I said, I'm not doing your job, and I want to get you in trouble, but I think you could leave the package there. I think that's what the instructions say, if nobody answers it. So he was doing that. Then I asked him a question. I said, why are you delivering packages at 10 o'clock on Sunday night? And he said, well, this is my second job. I work in a restaurant, and he lived in Miami Gardens, which was not a great area, and it's about 40 minutes away. And so he starts, so he worked in a restaurant all day. He's delivering packages at night. Then I asked him, where are you from? I'm from Cuba. When did you get here? Like 9 months ago. I'm like, this guy has a car. He's been here for 9 months. I now have been to Cuba. This is not an easy place to come from and get established in the United States. He might not be living in a great neighborhood, but he's got a car. He's got 2 jobs. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, all these people that are complaining about they have no opportunities, these people are walking into this country and they're seeing opportunities everywhere. So when it comes to, I actually am starting to reframe as well the entrepreneur mindset, as in some ways we need to have an immigrant mindset. Because we are born in a land of prosperity. And we are born with so many opportunities. We 90% of our days are in climate controlled environments. We can just drive 5 minutes down the street. We have as much food as we have access to. We don't even know where it comes from. It's just there. And we might complain that it's 10% higher this year than it was last year. But if you think about the amount of people who don't have those opportunities, when they walk into this country, they see opportunities everywhere. And that's what the entrepreneur sees. The entrepreneur sees opportunities where other people don't. And so that's why a lot of times I say we kind of need to adopt that immigrant mindset sometimes and start realizing there are opportunities everywhere. How can we use the environment we're in to take the best advantage of it? And by the way, it might not even be in the United States. I know a lot of people that are working digitally from places like Medellin, Colombia, and all these other places where I interact with people, and they have found that is their American dream now, like going somewhere else, and maybe they're working there for a year, maybe they're meeting somebody there and establishing a family there, and they're going to live there the rest of their life, who knows? But the idea is we have access to so much, and so using that freedom and maybe carving out more freedoms for ourselves through those opportunities. So that's where I rest my case on the American dream, and I think if you think like an entrepreneur and adopt these characteristics, you will succeed in any environment you're placed in. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzales.
Hey, thank you, and I'm sorry if I talk so long. You can see I'm love and passionate about what I do.
No problem. Entrepreneur online. Thank you for joining us, and tune in for another keynote seminar this semester.